Hello and welcome to the annual Wing Careers event. I'm Hester and I'll be hosting on behalf of Wing UK today. So Wing is here to promote the education, professional development and the advancement of women in the geothermal community. Even in 2021, we're still fighting for equality. I found this really interesting statistic down here that shows that women in leadership positions in Wall Street and Silicon Valley are still just at 25%. But with fantastic organisations like Women in Geothermal, hopefully we can continue to increase this number for equality between men and women in leadership roles. So Wing itself, it has a global network of 2,016 members as of 2 o'clock today. These members are spread over 74 different countries, and we have 34 different chapters that make up a global Wing network. We've got very ambitious targets set for 2023. Hopefully, well, we're well on our way to getting 2,500 members. We want to have a Wing group in each geothermal country, and we also want to have a 50% male membership. So if there are men attending today and you feel slightly outnumbered, we highly recommend that you become a member and get involved with everything we do. So Wing is here to promote the visibility of women, to be here as a sounding board for any advice you may need, any technical advice, or just career advice. And also, if you just want to say hi, make yourself known to us, it's really good to have the community of women there and men. So who are Wing UK? We're a very active chapter. We have monthly Wednesday with Wings, which consist of seminars, technical presentations, some career advice, and also skill sharing. We also have a quarterly newsletter which promotes achievements, news and insightful pieces from the geothermal industry, especially with emphasis on the UK. And hopefully we'll have some in-person events soon. So watch this space. If you're not already a Wing member, please do sign up. It's a free membership. And also follow us on our various social media platforms, so LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter. I will now stop presenting and pass over to Zainab, who will be chairing this year's committee. So Zainab, I will now pass over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Hester. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are joining us from across the world. Thank you very much for being here today. For today's careers panel, we have a great number of professionals in our midst from the industry, the academia, here to share their knowledge with us on the geothermal industry. And we're looking forward to learning so much over the next hour. Before we get started, I would start by introducing the panel. So first off, today we have David Townsend. David will be joining us just shortly. So David is the MD of Town Rock Energy, an award-winning geothermal consultancy based in Edinburgh, Scotland. He has managed numerous geothermal and ground source energy projects from pre-feasibility stage through to drilling and testing. So that's Dave with us today. Then we also have Charlotte Adams. So Charlotte is the commercial manager for Mine Energy at the Coal Authority. She's a geologist and hydrogeologist by training, holding a PhD from Newcastle University and working as a geothermal researcher for 11 years at Durham University. Next, we have Oliver Ward. Oliver is a geoscientist with Sequent, primarily working with geothermal clients, leveraging Sequent's strength in the mining, civil, environmental, and energy sectors. He is working to help oil and gas companies adopt carbon-neutral technologies in the fight against climate change. Then we also have with us Dr. Ida Schaffer. Dr. Ida Schaffer is a postdoctoral research fellow at the School of Engineering, University of Leeds. Ida's main research focus is on geothermal heating and cooling systems. Her current work includes modeling of ground-coupled heat exchange systems such as foundation heat exchanger elements, tunnels, and wastewater networks. And then finally, we have Helen Robinson. Helen is currently in the final few months of her PhD. She has worked on collaborative projects on groundwater and hazards associated with geothermal energy in Kenya and Malawi. Helen has also set up the Geothermal Villages Network in Kenya. So thank you very much to our panelists for being here today. It's really a great pleasure to have a wide range of industry professionals as well as academic experiences. So we're going to start our panel discussion for today. And we've had a number of questions come in from the audience, and we're just going to hopefully have time to take as many as we can. So I think the first question would be quite a general one, but I think I would direct it first of all to Dave Townsend. So Dave, do you think that the UK will see more deep geothermal projects like the Eden project and United Downs in future years? So I think this is a very timely event. Last week was Pivot 2021. Geothermal was reimagined. And I think there's a lot of attention, even in the UK now, to the geothermal industry. So from your perspective, your experiences, do you think the UK would now see more of such projects as the Eden project and the United Downs in future years?
Great, yeah. So it's been fascinating to be able to watch the sector grow for the last 8 years, and kind of be sort of somewhere in the middle of it. Before I even started Townrock, I met Ryan Law and Guy McPherson Grant at the All Energy Conference about 9 years ago, and both of them were talking about the Eden project and the United Downs project, and constantly trying to push those forward. So to see that take about 7 years of my career before they started happening, and now they're, United Downs is in final testing mode and Eden is in the middle of being drilled, it's extremely encouraging. Yes, there's going to be many more deep geothermal projects in Cornwall. Ryan Law's already identified 4 more sites that they're pushing forward now through planning and so on. And however, there is a kind of geographical constraint to a degree. Proving it in Cornwall doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a flurry of activity elsewhere in the country with regards to the same type of deep geothermal project. And we do need more deep, that first deep exploration well in every given kind of geological terrain is going to be really important to spur in other wells, just like in United Downs. But I think if you broaden the geothermal out to not just deep geothermal, but mine water geothermal and open loop heat pumps, the sector is growing very rapidly, and there's a lot of excitement across that whole space, not just for the next 2 years, but the next 10, 20 years, as the decarbonization of heat in the UK is accomplished, with those technologies playing a really key role.
Great, thank you very much, Dave, for your response. I think I had Charlotte coming on earlier, and I think Dave mentioned something quite interesting that I think, Charlotte, you might be able to talk more about that. So will the geothermal mine water projects be able to heat our major cities? So if the UK is to scale geothermal, what would you say will be the contribution of mine water projects?
It could make quite a big contribution. We've got around about 23,000 abandoned deep coal mines across the UK, and that relates to about a quarter of people who live on or above the coal fields, and 9 out of 10 of our largest urban areas by geographical size are underlain by the mine workings. So it's got really good potential for those areas. A lot of those towns and cities grew on the strength of the coal reserves that were beneath them. That's why they developed. So it makes sense now to use that resource to help decarbonize them, because it means you've got the resource where the heat demand is. So yeah, in a nutshell, there's a lot of potential there.
I think it's quite exciting to hear that 9 out of 10 major cities are underlain by coal mines, and that gives, a very huge opportunity for the geothermal industry. So for the other members of the panel, before we move on to the next question, I wonder if anyone has anything to add regarding sort of the future of geothermal in the UK in the next, say, 5 to 10 years, your perspective on that?
Yeah, I'd love to say, I think one of the things that the UK is the reason that maybe we're a bit slower or behind other countries is simply because of legislation. we haven't got the kind of structure in place to actually exploit. So I'm talking about more shallow or low temp geothermal, the stuff we're seeing in sort of aquifers, which are spread throughout the UK. And also understanding the kind of different way that we would exploit that, because we're purely relying on the heat and not the electricity generation. It requires more of a local council or more, you know, a city to work together to drill the wells and to circulate the water around to heat the building. So it's a lot more, it's not a simple one company goes and does it. You have to get a lot of buy-in from the local area. So if you look at sort of the Netherlands, who are already exploiting their all their old oil and gas data in order to start producing geothermal, they're a lot further ahead of us because they've made it possible, and they also provide insurance for any companies that are drilling and things, that if it's not a good well, then they get some money back, so the risk is reduced somewhat. So something we really need to do is start lobbying the UK government to help UK geothermal really take off and become more of a primary role in the sort of energy discussion.
Thank you very much, Olive. I think that's a very important point. Looking at the legislation for the geothermal in the UK, I think that's one area that would be able to accelerate the growth of the industry in the UK. Helen, I think I would like to pass this on over to you. So, what would you say is the biggest obstacle to large-scale rollout of geothermal in the UK?
Well, I mean, Ollie's really sort of touched on a significant aspect of it. You know, this sort of, some of the barriers are sort of around sort of financing and perception, but ingrained within that issue of financing is, excuse me, is risk of developing certainly the deep geothermal aspect of it. And with that comes mitigation and risk facilities and insurance and protecting those investors if a project doesn't go quite to plan and a well misses its target. And so we do need to, you know, Ollie's touched on it, we need to improve our legislation and our policy and our support for investors to protect them against that potential risk. And as technology improves and our understanding of the subsurface within the UK improves, some of that risk will reduce slightly, but it's always going to be there. There's always going to be an aspect of inferring what the subsurface might be doing. You might only have enough data to a given depth of 4 kilometers, but you're targeting something that's a little bit deeper than that, and therefore you may end up having to infer that, and your inference could be right, it could be wrong. You could be monitoring faults at the surface that have got great permeability, but that characteristic changes at depth and things like that. And so that risk will always be there. And so we have to find a way to encourage the government to support the industry much better.
Thank you. So it's government engagement, government participation, I think, is one way to really rapidly advance the geothermal industry in the UK. I don't know if other panelists have anything to add to this. If there's any other perspective to this, if not, we can move on to the next question. So Ida, I think I'll pass this on to you. What opportunities are there globally and in the UK for PhD geoscientists? How would you say the opportunities, abound?
Okay, first I'm going to clear it here. I'm not a geologist myself. I'm coming from an engineering background. I did mechanical engineering in undergrad and a totally different subject in my PhD, but then I moved to earth sciences, and then from there, with my background in engineering and the numerical analysis skills I had, I joined the geothermal group, a shallow geothermal group in the School of Civil Engineering in Leeds. At the moment, what I know is that in earth sciences, because universities are trying to kind of like switch their research from petroleum engineering towards geothermal, there are opportunities for doing MSc research or PhDs focused on geothermal rather than petroleum engineering. So geology students, instead of doing PhD in petroleum related subjects, they can do PhDs in geothermal related subjects. Again, at the university with good professors, supervisors, and there are fundings available for that as well. Apart from geology, if you're coming from any other different background, because we need heat transfer analysis, for example, for what I do, or we need material engineers to come and do part of the analysis for us. So you don't necessarily need to be a geologist to get involved in geothermal. There are lots of opportunities, again, as I said, for MSc by research and PhDs. Funded PhDs are available globally, and it's getting better in the UK. There might not be much opportunities for doing PhD in geothermal, unfortunately, in the UK, but it's getting much better compared to last few years. So lots of different projects are coming up, and people are tending to get more funding focused on these projects. So I just want to say, highlight this, that you don't necessarily need to be a geologist to be involved in geothermal, like myself. But because universities are kind of like changing their strategies and moving towards green energy rather than, still studying and working, doing research on conventional fuels, they're kind of like changing their area. It's not necessarily like they change the whole thing. So what you've done in your undergrad as a geologist, absolutely fine, but they define the project somehow to suit geothermal rather than petroleum engineering. So if anybody's interested, if you just, for example, go to website like jobs.ac.uk and search for PhD in geothermal, or put just different subjects like shallow geothermal, geology, different topics, because sometimes there are geothermal projects, but geothermal is not necessarily mentioned in the titles. For example, recently a job came up and one of our students applied for it, and it was material engineering, but it's a geothermal related project. So you just need to keep an eye and search for that. And yeah, there are lots of opportunities now, much better than I would say 3-4 years ago.
Great. It's great to see that there are many opportunities coming on for students or other maybe early career professionals who want to go into geothermal. So from an industry perspective, I think Dave, are there opportunities for say PhD geoscientists or just students or early career professionals who want to get into the geothermal? What would you say about that?
Yeah, so I think if you're doing like a master's or a PhD, the first piece of advice is to try to reach out to industry while you're doing your research, and to see how much supervision you might be able to get from someone in industry to help you tailor a portion of the research towards a sort of applied approach. And I also think that, I completely agree with Ida that you don't need to be a geologist. In fact, the geothermal industry needs every discipline, just about. It needs absolutely every discipline to make the whole industry work. And I think at this early stage in the industry in the UK, it's important to have as big an understanding of the big picture as possible. I think that there might be limited jobs because of the limited number of projects for very, very niche specific disciplines. And so the more that you can have a bit of engineering, a bit of finance, a bit of geology, a bit of environmental and social understanding of a project, the more that you'll be able to actually apply yourself to not just working on projects, but even trying to make new projects happen. So when reaching out to industry as well, you don't need to reach out to a geothermal developer or a geothermal specialist. You could reach out to a potential heat customer, or a local authority that's looking at their heat strategy, and just tell them about your research and tell them about the opportunity, because there's the lack of awareness that this is even an option and a big piece of the puzzle for the low carbon heat transition is one of the main reasons geothermal has been slow to take off compared to other technologies. So seeing yourself as both a scientist but also a cheerleader, if you wish, is going to help you find opportunities to work on when you finish your studies.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. It's important to seek out practical ways to engage with the industry as well, and that would create opportunities for entering into geothermal. So moving on now, I would like to pass this on to Ollie. So what would you say your day is like typically as a, in the geothermal industry? A day in the life of a geothermal professional.
Sure. So I'm coming at this at a slightly different angle. So I'll get a bit of my background. So I spent the last 10 years in the oil industry, 9 of those with Western Geco, which is part of Schlumberger, doing as a geophysicist, acquiring, shooting seismic for 6 years, and then interpreting it for 3 years. And then only the beginning of this year, I joined Sequent, who produce software which the geothermal industry use, geomodeling software. So when I had been in the oil industry, I'd been a bit worried about my future job security, and so for a long time I was looking at, and I wanted to move into something energy transition. And so when this role came up, although I'm not a software person, I use software every day, but I've never really tried to sell it or sort of anything like that. I took them up on it because it allows me to actually talk to many clients who use the software. So we've got a very strong foothold in the high temperature field. So everything you see, you're well known in Iceland and US and Turkey, Indonesia, New Zealand, stuff like that. But we're slowly moving into more the low temp field. So sort of my daily interaction is talking to a lot of either well-established clients who have already been working in the high temp field, or people, for example, the Germans in the North German Basin, or down in Switzerland, where they've got some stuff already going on with the sort of shallow geothermal. But also I talk to a lot of oil companies, or even sort of very young companies with oil veterans running it, who are looking to join the geothermal field. And to be honest, many of them don't actually understand much about it. They know the basics, and quite often we have conversations where we sort of need to sort of understand exactly what they're actually trying to achieve with it, because there's the education about it is lagging behind. So people want to get involved, but sometimes it's a bit of a struggle to get hold of that information. So yeah, my kind of interaction is very much just as much as sort of the basics of my job, of which is explaining my software, but also sort of talking about contacts, who to talk to find out about, for example, flow simulators, who to talk about sort of drilling of these wells as well, because it's very similar to the oil industry, but there are also quite a few key differences, and also just communicating the differences between the oil and gas and geothermal, because everyone can see there's clear similarities, but it's quite hard to sort of really drill down into that. So I would love to see sort of more sort of better communication from everybody as well, sort of trying to explain exactly like the technical part behind that. And we're seeing more and more university courses starting, master's courses, looking at moving into geothermal. So I've recently been working with Leeds, who started up a sort of geothermal part, and there are many more that are just sort of nascent geothermal education programs starting, which is fantastic news.
Great. So as a geothermal professional, you have a lot of client interactions, you engage with a lot of people within and outside the industry, and you focus a lot on trying to communicate, the knowledge about the geothermal industry. I think that's something that it's the responsibility of everyone in the industry to kind of create that awareness and share that knowledge about the industry. So I think we will now go on to Helen, just to get some perspective on how, your experience in the geothermal industry is as a researcher. So do you do a lot of field work, and, how much travel? How is it basically for you as a researcher in this space?
Excuse me, I'm really fortunate that I do get to do a lot of field work, and I do get to travel quite a lot. And it really depends on what direction within the geothermal sector you go in. yeah, I've spent quite a lot of time in East Africa, so predominantly in Kenya, but I've also done some work in Malawi and Ethiopia in particular. And it's basically down to what my research is all about. I'm a big advocate for the development of geothermal resources for electricity in East Africa. However, their sort of policies and legislations are very broken, they're not followed, they don't understand the impact of significant groundwater abstraction on the shallow environments, what the impact of drawdown might be on UNESCO World Heritage Sites and shallow drinking water aquifers and mechanical connections along faults and things like that. And so spending a lot of time in East Africa collecting water samples and for chemistry analysis and modelling that chemistry and what that might mean for the environment, and then sharing that with the policymakers, so the Africa Power Platform, the Kenyan government, and even communities, so they can understand their local resources and off-grid resources, is really important and really significant when it comes to sort of making sure that their resources are developed in a sustainable manner that's not going to impact other aspects of their environment. And so that's sort of water anthropology, drawdown on protected lakes over time could impact tourism and things like that. And it's really a challenging environment to work in. There's a lot of mistrust in rural communities when you turn up, because they associate you with the oil and gas sector, who are not very transparent. And so there's a lot of work that's involved. You can't just turn up to a well and collect some water. You have to communicate with the tribal leaders, the community leaders, get permission. If they say no, there's not a lot you can do about it. But it makes it really interesting, really challenging, and something that I personally really enjoy as well.
I think it's really very important that in addition to just doing the research or the technical work, that you also emphasize on community engagement, because that's very important to drive the industry. Because just like you said, it's important to be transparent so people understand the value of the geothermal industry. Now, Charlotte, I think this question will be for you. You have been a researcher in geothermal for 11 years. So how has the industry supported you and enabled you to thrive in your career? And how is the industry encouraging diversity, you would say?
Just thinking where to start with that, whether to reflect on my time at the university or my time now, I suppose. I mean, when we were doing research, it wasn't too closely linked with industry, although it always has been quite applied. It was funded by research councils. And obviously the EDI issues are very important within the research councils, within the universities. So, I've always found working relationships very fruitful and very collaborative. Some of the industry stuff that I did when I was at the university with the Brit Geothermal group and David and Helen, I understand Helen's now involved in this, and David was involved with it with me at the time. We were organising a national symposium, and that was really good way. And that's another good thing to do if you're interested in the career, and if you're a researcher at the moment, see if you can get involved in organising a conference, because people are always after help. But we used to approach a lot of industry people to come along, so that's quite a good way to get a bit of an inroad with them, invite them, find out about what they do. So that's quite a good thing you can be doing. I found everything very positive. I've obviously moved now now I'm in the public sector. I have worked in the private sector. I worked as an energy consultant before I was in research, and I've found the industry engagement all very fruitful, all very positive. I've always felt very included in things. I think I've been very lucky with the experiences I've had. Sometimes there is an element of having to prove yourself, but I think as long as you're committed to what you're doing and you've got your facts right, people will give you a good hearing, and you'll be treated well. I mean, it's as I say, I found it very positive. And I guess it's just thinking about which bits of industry you want to target. And when I was in academia, and I guess probably throughout my whole of my career, I've kept things quite broad. So although I'm a hydrogeologist by training, I've done quite a bit of energy engineering, I've done water treatment stuff. I've kept everything very broad, and that stood me in good stead, because you're able to make little changes or go for different jobs within an area. It gives you a bit more choice, I think. So try and keep things as broad as you can and pick up as many experiences. And for example, working in a consultancy, I worked in a small one, and I think that was good because they didn't have many staff. So I got exposed to a lot more variety of work than if you're in a bigger one where you might just be brought in to work on one particular thing. So that worked really well for me. And that's where I transitioned, I think, from the kind of geochemistry role I was doing initially after my PhD to the energy role, because they got me to work across the board on energy, and I learned loads. And that kind of stuck with me, and I realised that I really enjoyed doing that as well. So a bit of a long answer to your question, but hopefully that was a few helpful snippets in there.
Yeah, great. I think one key takeaway is the industry provides opportunities for collaboration, which is very good to know. And as well, if one is committed, then there are a lot of areas to explore in the geothermal industry as well. So that is very, very encouraging. So Ida, you mentioned earlier regarding the question on the opportunities for PhD geoscientists. So there are PhDs online. I think another question that came in is, where can MScs, BScs find opportunities as well? Where can recent graduates essentially find opportunities to move into the industry? I think this is probably an open question to other members of the panel as well.
Yes. Again, it depends if you're going for the UK industry or globally. With MSc, with PhD, definitely you would more target kind of like research and development jobs. If you've got BSc, it would be more like kind of like focused basic jobs, and MScs are again something in between. Where to look for a job is, if you're looking for an academic job, again, that's something different. You need to follow a different route. For industry jobs, there are certain industries in the UK that do geothermal, so you can always keep an eye on their websites or get in touch with them, sending them your CVs and interest, and say that you would like to work in this field. And also all those search engines, if you're particularly interested in geothermal, again, you need to always include the word geothermal, but unfortunately, it's not always included in the job adverts. But again, I would definitely recommend to get in touch with different industries that if you know them, or if you can, because sometimes when you are, most universities do this, they have this events that people from different industries come in, or there are job centers that you can get in touch with them within university, or those industries that your lecturers and people you work with, your supervisors, know. You can get in touch with them always and say, I'm interested in working in the field of geothermal, and this is my CV, and these are my skills, and go through that route. If they have something advertised, then again, you might be invited for interviews. If not, and if they see you've got the skills they need, again, they may offer you a job or offer you an interview to offer you a job. So these are the possible ways to find a job in industry. This is from my experience. Other panelists may have other ideas and ways to secure a job.
Yeah, I'll just add I really I totally agree. And as a sort of employer, or a very small employer in this space, it tends to be very much down to timing as to when a small company at least is going to hire someone. So it's worth getting in touch, and even if your initial inquiry says, sorry, we're not hiring right now, then saying, well, can I get back in touch again in 6 months and see how things have changed, and to really demonstrate a kind of interest and understanding in the company you're approaching, persistency is actually really key. And we recently hired a chemical engineering graduate, predominantly because he was, you know, persistent. He got in touch with me a few times on LinkedIn. Then we met up in person and we had a very sort of soft interview. And then we happened to be getting quite a bit more work at that point that was related to what his degree was in. And the other really important piece of timing was the government's Kickstart scheme came out, and he fit the criteria, so that we were able to get some support for those initial few months of his employment. So it was all these things of timing came together that we didn't advertise a role, but we've hired someone, and now we're looking to, you know, nurture him into a really, you know, full-time career employee at Townrock. And so yeah, be persistent, and don't be put off if companies just say no, we're not hiring. Just ask if you can get back in touch. And in the meantime, you know, get to know what it is you think you can offer them the next time.
I'd like to add a little bit to that as well. As there is an increasing number of internships that are geothermal related, and you quite often find, especially some of these smaller companies, they will offer an internship for a summer, or, you know, 6 months or a year or something like that. And if you're doing that straight out of your undergrad or your master's, you quite often will also find that, again, if the timing is good, that they will keep you on. We have one of the girls on the Women in Geothermal panel started off as an intern for a geothermal company in Cornwall, and she's now one of their permanent members of staff and has sort of gone through the ranks and is now a geologist. It's also worth considering internships that are not directly related to geothermal, but will give you some really good skill sets. So, for example, I did an internship a couple of years ago, 2015, with the Institute of Volcanology on the Canary Islands, and I was doing soil gas sampling and CO2 flux monitoring, and it was actually to monitor for volcanic unrest on one of the islands within the Canaries. However, those techniques that I learned were actually directly transferable to surface exploration in geothermal as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, you know, geothermal has a lot of opportunities for transferring skills from other industries. And another way I think, you know, recent graduates can explore opportunities in the geothermal industry is through social media. Helen, you manage the social media platforms for Wing. I wonder if you have anything to say about that, because I think joining even, you know, societies such as Wing and other geothermal groups would, you know, help to just explore opportunities. So do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, from the social media perspective for Women in Geothermal, I have Geothermal Alerts set up in my email, and whenever there's anything that mentions geothermal, I get an email about it, and then I can go through and find out, you know, is it UK based, is it global, what is it? Is it relevant to our audience and things like that? And we have a hashtag that's not just used by the UK, but it's used by the global community of women in geothermal, and it's Wing Jobs. And any geothermal related job that we find out about is posted on our social media platforms, and that's the Wing Global platforms, the Wing UK platforms, Turkey, the Philippines, so on and so forth. And so it is worth sort of looking out on our social, you know, following our social media platforms and keeping an eye out, because it'll be jobs, it'll be postdocs, it'll be PhDs, changes in MSc structures like we've already touched upon, internships, everything that sort of has some relevance within the geothermal sector will be posted on there. Even voluntary positions and things like that, or sort of, you know, looking for somebody for a week, you know, and some of the jobs and positions are UK based, some of them are based elsewhere, but just because you're UK based or anywhere else in the world doesn't mean to say that you can't apply for a job in the UK or in the US or something like that.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. So moving on now to the next question. I would like to direct this to Oliver. So how can petroleum service companies, experienced professionals, take part in the geothermal energy exploration? So you're coming from an oil and gas background. How would you say that maybe synergies, or professionals from those backgrounds can actually move into geothermal?
So yeah, so I'd say, and I've been looking at some of the questions coming in as well, and so I can maybe wrap up a few of these at once. But very much the idea of high temp geothermal, the kind of Iceland and stuff like that, that is very sort of heavily in the public mind. And I think we're only just starting, the kind of public is only starting to understand sort of low temp and shallow, which, much of the high temperature stuff is done in igneous hard rocks and metamorphic rocks, whereas, the low temp and the shallow is done a lot in sedimentary. And of course, the oil industry is very focused on sedimentary rocks. Spent the whole time characterization of the actual reservoirs, using seismic to image it. So seismic data is something, and obviously that's where I come from, but seismic data hasn't been used much in geothermal because A, it's expensive, and geothermal doesn't tend to have that much funding, but B, in hard rocks, the difference between the layers is very hard to see, so it doesn't work as well. So it's only now that the technology's got good enough to be able to see it. So there's a lot of opportunity for geophysicists, particularly because we've got remote sensing, anything potential field, anything non-seismic is fantastic to have. Obviously, drilling is a huge part of geothermal, and in fact, that's where we're seeing a lot of advances in the geothermal industry. You look at EGS and AGS systems like Everloop and things like that. It's all, as much as some people may not want to admit it, but it's come a lot from the oil industry and their expertise at drilling at lot high depths and things. We're also seeing sort of improvements with depths of drilling as well. So as we go to very deep geothermal, we're seeing all the time. I saw something on Pivot last week about firing ballistic shells into the well to make it even deeper, and also something using electric arc to burn through the rocks. But also you can look at, for example, one thing I had no idea that that geothermal, and obviously we have experts here, but geochemistry is something that it's very important in geothermal to understand. I mean, if anything, just the basic understanding of corrosion to your system if you set up a well or something. But that's another part that you might be able to go down. Petrophysics, if you want to understand, characterize reservoir. Obviously, reservoir modeling, which I've always thought was a bit of a black magic. I've never truly been a proper reservoir modeler, and I think they're reservoir engineers as well, very much in their own self. And as Ida was saying, also engineers, topsides, all the actual processing plants for taking that hot water and turning it into electricity. There's a whole range. You've got flash plants, you've got my mind's gone completely blank, but essentially, binary stuff like that. It uses all different types of ways of generating electricity from a lower temperature water. So, there's such a field to come from, and I think I'll just finish on the fact that coming from Schlumberger, which is oil services company, and looking at a competitor like Halliburton, both are trying to react to this. Both they're trying to start up their own geothermal thing. So Schlumberger acquired Geothermex, which is kind of more high temperature geothermal, and they also got, I can't remember who they're called, but essentially Celsius. They had a startup, Celsius, so they're kind of trying to buy up as many and try and get that expertise. But I found, because I wanted to move into it, it was very hard for me as an employee to shift across, because I think everyone wanted to do it, and they were like in their own things and still quite nascent. But I've seen Halliburton are doing very well at sort of bringing up their skill set for that. So what these guys are saying about joining small consultancies, and that's something I truly believe, because I started in a very small consultancy and it got me a lot of experience. But also, I would say on the opposite end, joining a massive company will get you a lot of training, and it will give you opportunities to travel to places and to do things. And if you push and push and push and keep on saying every annual review or whenever your reviews are, I want to work in geothermal, I know we've got a geothermal, please put me in there, otherwise I'll quit. It's kind of, sometimes it's the only way, because it's a small job pool at the moment, and it is expanding, but it is hard. And when I looked for jobs in geothermal, I just couldn't find any. And in fact, the one that kept on popping up annoyingly for me was graduate geoscientist working for CGG, which obviously wasn't my position because I was 10 years experience. But I was like, oh, I wish I was a graduate now because I could just join them and do that. So certainly keep your eye out, and yeah, oil industry applications, there are so many, but it's just still learning to kind of bring those skills together and to get into the geothermal industry.
Yeah, I think the skills in the oil and gas industry are very transferable to the geothermal industry. I mean, if we look at a typical field development project for an oil and gas field, I mean, if you look at the phases, right, from exploration all the way to field abandonment, there are similarities with the geothermal industry. So there are a lot of opportunities for professionals or even graduates who have studied petroleum engineering courses. But Charlotte, I would like to ask, how do you think, say, people having other degrees outside petroleum, say maybe in marine oceanography, how might they, be able to transfer some of these skills into the geothermal for those who are interested?
I think there are lots of links. I mean, like as David mentioned before, we need lots of other disciplines in there. So that might be something like doing the environmental impact studies that would cover a thermal project. So you might have either marine or a conservation type background there, or a geography background, maybe looking at surface water impacts of geothermal. We've already talked, I think, Ida referred to as well the need for topside and engineering disciplines as well. So it really is a very multidisciplinary topic, and also as well, I think with some of the stuff we're doing, there's a need for kind of commercial models and some of the business side of it as well. There's not really a market for heat in the UK, so there's potential for some new ideas there about financing, funding. So I think really there could be a very broad range of disciplines. With stuff specifically like marine that you mentioned, that's a bit more difficult to think of the link there. But it depends what you're doing within that, because a lot of the skills that you could do would be transferable. And like Helen was talking about her internship, so it's thinking about the skills that you took from that you could also apply to another discipline as well. But as a field, I think it probably does call for quite a broad range of disciplines. So I think if it's something you want to get into, even if you feel you're not directly qualified for it, I wouldn't let that put you off. I would still explore it.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have around about 10 minutes, so we'll just take a few more questions. So Dave, I'd like to pass this on over to you. What are the in-demand roles for geothermal analytics and application development in geothermal? So as we focus on the energy evolution, we cannot overlook the fact that we need to also combine this with IT and intelligence and a lot of other skills in data science, data engineering. So what would you say are some roles or maybe some applications of data analytics in geothermal?
My cynical answer is that you just need to put that into the first slide of your pitch and you can raise a few £1 million that you're applying AI and machine learning to geothermal. Boom, here's £1 million done. In reality, well, that is unfortunately quite a lot of reality, but I want to say it's really in the so in the exploration phase for geothermal, there's a phrase with regards to modeling and reservoir modeling, garbage in, garbage out, and the lack of geological data and accurate reservoir data in most deep geothermal cases and even in shallow geothermal cases makes the whole modeling process sometimes more of a fundraising and confidence building exercise than something that's actually technically useful. In the operations side, it's massively useful. All systems have scope to become more efficient and more to have a lower carbon footprint, to have a higher coefficient of performance, or to deliver a better service to the customer that the energy is being provided for. And that's where, you know, large scale data collection analytics is really, really important. So, you know, there's a massive industry in sort of building management systems and plant management systems, but applying that and optimizing it specifically for different types of geothermal and heat pumps is really important. And it's probably a really important field for research, but also for you know, applied R&D in industry as well. So if that's your passion, data analytics, I would be looking at trying to find operational or nearly operational plants that you could work on, as opposed to necessarily in the exploration phase. But I'd be happy for a really qualified reservoir engineer to argue against that.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting take on that as well. So Ida, I'll just pass this question over to you. What would you say are tangible effects that academic research has had on the UK geothermal, and also what current frontiers of research are most prevalent in the geothermal industry?
Okay, as I'm working in the field of shallow geothermal, mainly for heating and cooling of buildings, so it might not be related to what other guys are talking about with regard to deep geothermal. Unfortunately, there are not many shallow geothermal projects going on in the UK at the moment, but there are a few industries that we are working with and few enthusiastic individuals who's applied these techniques in their homes to extract heat from the ground and use that for heating and cooling of their homes. So the sort of research that we are doing at Leeds University is basically developing kind of like design models for people in industry, especially the field that I'm working, which is substructure heat exchangers. So they need design parameters, how to, you know, what sort of, depending on what sort of substructure heat exchangers they're using. So how to arrange them to basically extract the maximum heat based on the condition of the ground and things they've got from their ground. So the type of research we're doing is essential for industry because they need a straightforward method of analysis and design for their cases, rather than, you know, because in academy we can easily do lots of modelings, but it might not be possible for people in industry to do that. They might not have enough time or enough resources like software skills to go ahead with that. What we've been asked is a very simple method just to get an initial estimate of how, for example, the heat loads, how much they can extract and things like that. So the few industries we are working with in the UK, they've been very supportive, and our research has had some impact on their work with regard to their design processes. It's getting better than before, but as I said, there are not many shallow geothermal projects going on in the UK, mainly because lots of buildings in the UK are aged buildings. So they, rather than having a whole new construction, they need kind of like retrofit. That's why we're also looking at extracting heat in tunnels, especially rail stations, and also from switch systems. So these are other things that we are looking at. And yeah, we are publishing our results, and we are working closely with those few industries regarding who work on shallow geothermal in the UK. But also I've worked on a Horizon 2020 project where we work with different partners across Europe, because shallow geothermal is more explored in other countries in Europe, for example, in Spain, in Italy, in Netherlands. So we've worked closely with them. We visited their sites, and they're using these methods that we are developing in their design, and also with some industries in the States. So it's getting better, but it depends how we proceed with shallow geothermal in the UK, as I said, because of, you know, all these aged buildings we've got. Mainly, we may need to focus on retrofit rather than having new constructions.
Right. Helen, do you have any perspective on current frontiers for research in geothermal? Perhaps there are people in the audience considering research in geothermal, and what are areas you would suggest?
I mean, I think I would sort of echo some of the things that Ida was saying there in respect to sort of within academia, we have that we still have our targets to meet, and we still, you know, we still have to outline projects for funding, and we still have to sort of make sure that we're doing what we've stated we're going to do in order to secure that funding. However, within academia, we do have that element of flexibility where we can be creative and come up with some almost crazy ideas for geothermal and put them to the test and do the modelling and do the lab experiments, and the experiments go wrong and we have the time to adapt them and learn from that and then work out how that might apply to the geothermal sector. And it is really just a case of keeping an eye out. I mean, while we don't have very much shallow geothermal going on in the UK at the moment, there are projects there. There's the UK the GEOS projects that are going on with the mines. So Charlotte's really sort of the person to talk more about that aspect of stuff, looking at sort of extracting the heat from the mines and mine water. And there's a huge amount of work going on in that at the moment, with sort of, as we've stopped pumping the mines, the sort of groundwater rebound in that in those mines, and what that's doing on the stress within those mines, and modelling how, if we then started abstracting it again, how that might affect or might not affect the stability of the mines and the resources that we have there as well. And that's a really sort of really interesting take on it. And there's all sorts of other stuff with new technologies that are being developed and things like that as well. And it all needs sort of testing and experiments and things like that. So whilst it's on the up, you still need to just, you need to push for it. If you've got an idea for something in geothermal, don't be afraid to go forward to one of your supervisors or academic sort of peers and say, can we do something with this, because it might be the answer to some real challenge that we have at the moment.
Thank you very much, Helen, for that. I'm mindful of our time. We have less than 2 minutes left. There's just one question that I think in 1 minute, maybe one of our panelists can just briefly talk about how the use of geothermal energy is projected to change when compared to other sources of energy. Just a 1 minute perspective on that. I think that's helpful. Any thoughts on that?
Go on, Dave, you're good at this.
Yeah, I know. It's a big question. Again, what type of geothermal are you talking about here? Low carbon heat is guaranteed to grow a lot. Our currently 55% or 50% of our heating, of our energy consumption is heat, and the other 50% is transport and electricity. So it's an enormous sector that's currently 95% fossil fuels. Whether geothermal or ground source heat pumps or air source heat pumps or biomass or hydrogen as a vector or other solutions are the bigger or smaller solution for that low carbon heat transition. It's a massive ongoing debate right now. Yes, there will be massive growth in geothermal and ground source heat pumps. Will it be bigger or smaller than the growth in hydrogen fuel cells? I'm not going to try and answer that, but I'd like to say yes. The point is, when I started 8 years ago, there were no geothermal jobs at all. Now there are some, and there are many projects in development where, again, 7, 8 years ago, there were very, very, very few. And now you can they don't fit on your hands when you count them. There's more. So, you know, there's a lot of optimism to go straight into this industry now, whereas maybe 5, 10 years ago, you would be told you have to get experience in oil and gas before you're employable. There are many more graduate positions now available. So yeah, definitely worth you know, getting to understand the massive mix of different opportunities within what is a very broad sector, and seeing where you want to hone your skills and focus on trying to enter the industry.
I would like to add one more positive note, which is back in the 1970s in the UK, you know, the oil industry started to take off. There was huge finds being made and, you know, massive employment, and there was a huge rush. And there are many of those people now who are reaching retirement, and they've made a whole career of that. And I think geothermal, maybe a bit optimist, but I believe it. I think we're right on that cusp right now. So I think being a graduate now is a fantastic thing. And if you're trained up and you know something, you know, you have the knowledge from uni and you can bring it into a new job, you know, that might just carry you all the way through your career, and you might be one of those veterans in 40 years time that everyone sort of looks at and goes, wow, they've managed to, you know, completely change the face of the UK with geothermal.
Great. Thank you very much to our panelists. It's really been an engaging and educative discussion so far. We still have a few more questions, but then our time is up, and I'll just pass back over to Hester. But in summary, I think the key takeaway is the industry is growing. There are opportunities for people even from disciplines outside geoscience, and as well, you know, as students, as recent graduates, if we can demonstrate interest and persistence, then I think the industry will be a very good place for us to move into starting now. So thank you very much. Hester, are you there?
Yes, thank you so much, Zainab, for chairing that panel. You did an excellent job. And I'd just like to say a massive thank you from Wing to all our panelists. I've learned a lot today myself. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves. And if anyone wants to become a member of Wing, it's on our website, so just check us out there. Thanks again, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.